Our keynote speaker this evening, President Abraham Lincoln, also known as Fritz Klein. I am so honored to have his talent here. He is nationally known, most honorable individual who doesn't need an introduction.
Well, my friends and fellow citizens, it is with great pleasure that I appear before you this evening. I am convinced, my friends, that we of this generation, this administration, this Congress, are going to be remembered in spite of ourselves. That there's no personal significance or insignificance that will spare any one or other of us. The fiery trial through which we are passing is sure to light us down on the pages of history. They tell us history is simply a philosophy teaching by example. If we were to run our memories over the pages of our own history, we would find that we were once a very small people in point of numbers, vastly inferior to what we are today. But it is now said that we are possessed of the best government the world has ever known. We've grown in numbers, wealth, power like no other nation has ever grown. We look upon the changes that have transpired over these years as being vastly advantageous to us, to our posterity. And we fix upon something that happened way back when as in some way being connected with this great change and rise in prosperity. If we look back carefully, we'll find a race of men living back in those days whom we claim as our fathers and grandfathers. But if we look closely, we will see that they were iron men. They fought for the principles for which they were contending and which has bequeathed to us so great an heritage. They fought. It was a war. War, I suppose at its very best, is a terrible thing. This particular war of ours is perhaps for its magnitude and duration one of the most terrible. War is certainly not a thing to be enjoyed. But it seems that there can be blessings that result from it. We are the recipients of some of these choicest blessings. Other good things seem to be brought forth in the midst of the upheavals of war. One is courage. Courage becomes a very stark and real thing. It suddenly appears as of vital importance in such times as in which we live. The fact of it is, courage is indeed the queen of all virtues. Without it, no other virtue would survive, because regardless of what virtue or character trait we profess, when it is tested, it will require courage to sustain it. Without it, all virtue would die. Without it, fear and conformity would make slaves of us all, putting good and right in the background. And when we see courage, particularly on the battlefields of war, with all of its beauty, with all of its skill, and with all of its dread severity, good things often come forth. We feel inspired to emulate a like courage even more. Perhaps we feel ashamed that we have not more of it, or perhaps have not had more of it. I think it's interesting that though we humans are possessed of many vices, we can somehow, in the deceitfulness of our hearts, become proud of those vices. But no one ever seems to be proud of cowardice. A lack of courage haunts us. And no one knows that better than the soldier, the one who has survived the battles. He must deal with misgivings, forebodings, perhaps even shame for the rest of his life for having not had the courage perhaps he thought appropriate. And so war, for all of its dread eventualities, indeed has its own purposes. And I believe that the Almighty has had his own purposes in this war of ours. The manifestation of courage in the face of such grave danger as we have faced has a tendency to awaken the moral world within every one of us like nothing else can. You know, in times of peace and tranquility, we forget such things. We take them for granted. They seem to be givens. Good and evil and all of the great issues of life become remote, unimportant. But in this sad world of ours, unfortunately, a very dangerous one, moral issues clarify in times such as this. I have often dealt with the possibilities of my own cowardice. I remember as a boy getting hold of a little volume about the War of our Revolution and thinking as a mere boy about the earliest time of even being able to read, what was it that drove those people to such heights of courage? Later, I myself was a soldier. I saw many acts of courage as well as cowardice. Doubtless everyone who has been on or near a battlefield has seen powerful evidences of courage or lack thereof. We often stand in silence or even shock at such scenes. Acts of war, fresh upon our memories, cause our passions to run high. And with patriotism, our blood boils and easily runs over. But like the memories of our original revolution, those scenes eventually fade. I remember as a young boy going to the county seat with my father and seeing those few remaining men who fought in the War of our Revolution and thinking of them as like the last leaf on a tree in the fall, soon to be blown away and forgotten. You realize that at the close of the American Revolution, nearly every adult male bore upon them, either in memory or their bodies, the signs of those terrible struggles. And they were indeed a fortress of strength to this country, constant reminders of the price that we had to pay to secure the treasure of liberty. But what invading foes could never do, the silent artillery of time has succeeded in doing. They all eventually died. And now that they are gone, even as a forest of giant oaks being swept away in a hurricane, pillars of strength to this country crumbled away. The temple of liberty itself must fall unless we, their descendants, raise up on their places new pillars for the temple of liberty. The veterans of today are living histories of succeeding wars. Some of them have survived terrible scenes. Some of them so terrible they will never speak of them. Let there be no mistake. The sacrifices that have been made have surpassed all of our imaginations. When I think of such sacrifices, my friends, I am humbled. We read in the sacred writings, greater love hath no man than this, than that a man should lay down his life for his friends. That seems impossible to do. But there have been times, and there will continue to be times, when those among us will in fact rise up and do that very thing for their brothers and their sisters. We can never allow ourselves to forget. We are very proud of our heritage. We hold celebrations. We dedicate memorials, cemeteries. We teach our children about these events. But do we, in fact, have that same courage? We wish them to, but we must continue on. This world will little note nor long remember what we say at such events as this. But if we do our part, the world will never forget the men and the women who have been willing to take courage and to give their lives for their brethren. Some of them did it unwillingly. They were simply caught up in the heat of passion and the storm of the war. They joined the fray, and we remember them too. Their occasion was dark and difficult. Our occasion as well is piled high with difficulty. And my friends, we must rise to the occasion as did our fathers. We must disenthrall ourselves of the smallness of our own lives, and then perhaps we shall save our country. It was only 77 years ago that our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are now engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We have met on a great battlefield of that war, come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow such ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note or long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. And from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. And we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Thank you.